don't think so.
Gender blend from the
Who's
first job.
Took minutes off my life just showing up like this.
There were people who were. And senior leadership was just like, oh my God.
good?
We're good, Mayor. Yeah, we're fine.
We good? Okay, there we go. Good evening. Welcome to the March 14th, 2022 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight, there are 5 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card, and if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, you must fill out an affidavit that you have the authority for said organization. Please remember that this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be accepted. Will the city clerk please sound agenda item A?
Thank you, Mayor. That first item A is discussion of proposed ordinance changes regarding A, discharging firearms, and B, regulation of tobacco products and paraphernalia. Police Chief Rich Austin.
And Tammy, just for the record, do we have any public comment?
One that I will send to y'all. They're not here in person, so I can't read it aloud, but I'll make sure I email it to you. Other than that, I don't have
Okay,
any.
great.
Greetings, Mayor, members of council. Today I'd like to discuss two local ordinance considerations, discharging firearms and tobacco sales. So let's please first talk about the discharging of firearms. So the purpose of this, or the overall objective, is to explore enacting a city ordinance that addresses discharging firearms within the city, that balances the rights of firearms owners with the rights of property owners, and that promotes a safe and peaceful environment for all of our citizens. And there's a secondary objective, and that is to allow for local control of these types of violations. Otherwise, any violation, officer goes out, writes a ticket for one of these violations that would have to be heard in Fulton County Court, where perhaps the unique qualities of Milton would not necessarily be taken into consideration, as with our local judges. Fulton County Court also maintains a significant case backlog, and it would likely take months for a state case to be heard of this nature. And just a quick note, this ordinance would not address at all carrying of firearms within the city. This is only as it pertains to discharging firearms. So currently, Milton works under the state law. We do not have a local ordinance at all, except for a prohibition of firing firearms within our city parks. So as such, this activity is regulated only by state law, specifically OCGA 1611, 103, and 104. And 103 states that it shall be unlawful for any person without legal justification to discharge a firearm on or within 50 yards of a public highway. And 104 states that it shall be unlawful for any person to fire or discharge a firearm on the property of another person, firm, or corporation without having first obtained permission from the owner or lessee of the property. And that's really the only restrictions that we have in place currently. So some of the citizen concerns that the police department have heard: firing too closely to densely populated areas or neighborhoods, firing too closely to roadways, the noise from firearms, perception of a lack of restriction to just ensure overall safety, even when folks are firing their weapons in compliance with the state law. We took a look at what our neighboring jurisdictions are doing with this. Alpharetta, it's unlawful to fire anywhere within the city limit, except in the defense of persons or property. Canton, unlawful except for law enforcement, military, or drill or parade, or as part of a funeral ceremony. Cherokee County, sort of like Milton, they have a regulation for their county parks. Otherwise, they are governed by the state law. And the same with Forsyth. Johns Creek goes by the state law only. Sandy Springs, again, a parks regulation. Otherwise, they're governed by state law as well. In Roswell, interestingly, it's unlawful to discharge any firearm except as authorized by permit secured from the city administrator or his or her designee. A little different. So what are the possible benefits of perhaps an ordinance for discharging firearms in the city? Well, a local firearms ordinance has the potential to address the citizen concerns regarding to the discharging of firearms without a carte blanche restriction, as we've seen in other cities, and to do so without infringing upon the rights of firearms owners. It would also enable basic firearms violations to be addressed at a local level within our city court, where judges can take into account the unique qualities of Milton. And this would also allow cases to be heard much sooner than in state court, as I mentioned earlier. And this could also mitigate many of the citizen concerns that the department receives throughout the community, and again, balancing the rights of property and firearms owners while promoting safety and a peaceful environment within our city. And then it would also benefit our equestrian community by creating a more tranquil environment for horses and other animals. As we know, reaction to loud noises such as firearms may cause undue stress and even serious injury to animals. So just a couple of possible enhanced restrictions in Milton. These are what we would consider placing into an ordinance. One would be discharging over or across property of another. That would be prohibited. It would state something to the effect of, it shall be unlawful for any person to discharge any firearm onto or across the property of another without the express permission of the owner or other person in legal possession of such property. And this would be a particular benefit to owners of flag or flag-shaped lots. And then the only other restriction that we're currently looking at is it will be unlawful to discharge any type of firearm within 100 yards of any structure reasonably capable of habitation or occupation without express permission of such other person. Really the only two restrictions. And of course, the 50-yard rule, as we stated in the state law, 50 yards from a public street or highway would stand as well. So at this point, I'll pause just for any discussion or questions regarding a possible local firearms ordinance. Is this something that the council would be interested in exploring further?
Paul?
Chief, can you go back to your second last slide before the opportunity to ask questions, please? Yeah, next one, I think. Nope, go back towards the end. I'm sorry. It was the one where you're making suggestions.
So you're talking about the...
You're still going back towards the beginning. What I'm looking for is the second last slide.
I get to the last slide there.
The one right before you offered the chance to ask questions. There you go. That's what I'm looking for. So if I read the second one about discharging 100 yards from any structure reasonably capable of habitation or occupation without express permission of such other person, does that imply that if you have the permission of the next door neighbor, who may or may not be 100 yards away, you can fire?
Right.
You can discharge your weapon.
Yes.
So that sort of precludes what we're saying is a suggested imposed condition, right?
Right.
If we're trying to say that it's 100 yards, it's only 100 yards if you don't have the permission of your neighbor.
Right. You would have to be at least 100 yards away from the structure. But if you have the permission of your neighbor, you could fire closer to. So kind of put that in context a bit. Let's say we have someone who has quite a bit of property and then a neighborhood abuts up to their property. So they're used to years for shooting at the sort of the back of their property.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the back of their property abuts to someone else's backyard, which had not been the case before. And they may be 40 yards from the house. They may be shooting in a safe direction, but this would have that person without permission of the other occupant to have to be 100 yards away.
Okay. That's actually not as restrictive as I thought it might be when I first read your suggested solutions or suggested changes.
And again, if there's permission granted, then it wouldn't come into play.
Okay.
So permission exactly to do what? Because different bullets travel to different places
Just to discharge a firearm, it would either
of any
be,
type.
as long as it's otherwise legal under state law. As long as it's otherwise legal under state law. And of course, permission could be revoked as well.
Right.
Discharging over across property of another person, that I understand. That was something I probably thought was already there. Because if you're shooting into somebody's yard, I could see how that could be an issue. The 100 yards, have we had infractions where people have been hurt or anything? What, is it just complaints where people are perceiving they don't like the sound of a gun? That type of thing? Or have you had instances where people are shooting onto people's property, endangering them or breaking the existing law?
A combination. We've not had anyone hurt, to my knowledge, from someone shooting firearms. It's just that we're becoming so much more dense in some areas that we feel like that 50 yards, just that only restriction of 50 yards from a public street or highway, when that could put the person at a proximity to other residences and things like that very easily. That's where we start getting complaints. Some of it is noise driven. A lot of it is safety driven as well. For instance, we'll drive out to a situation like I described where someone's abutting up against another property, and we just have to tell that property owner, we're sorry, they're in compliance. And they feel like the person shooting in their backyard in that scenario.
I guess the concern I'd have is making that second restriction without, we're making a general statement, 100 yards, measure 100 yards, depending on what your lot is. You could have a larger lot, and then you're prohibiting that person to even discharge a firearm at all, because they may anywhere be in 100 yards. If they were 50 yards, they still may be able to do safe target practice or whatever they want to do. I'm not so concerned about the discharge across, because I understand that from a safety standpoint. I guess I thought that was already there, but you're right, the state law doesn't prohibit that, but that would probably be a smart thing. But the second one, I guess I'm not, at least right now, I'm not really in favor of going that direction.
Well, what about the noise impact? I mean, as people have horses, that is you hear that from far away, and animals know what that is. So I guess I'm unclear because I never hear target practice. Do you all? I don't ever hear it.
Where we live, for the most part, you can't be shooting in the subdivision.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you'd be within 50 yards of a public highway, most people. So on that side of Milton, it's not an issue. I think it becomes more an issue when you have larger lots.
But we don't really have the problem. This is just to kind of make sure that if we were to encounter a problem, it would be handled here where it would be expeditiously dealt with.
Correct. And we took 8 of these types of calls last year.
Okay.
How many?
8.
Okay.
And Chief, in those 8 calls, was it because of an equestrian concern, or was it somebody was shooting too close to their home, or they just heard gunshots and were concerned that there were gunshots?
I would have to go back and look. I do not recall any specifically that were equestrian related off the top of my head.
Which is surprising, actually.
Well, a lot of times too, we have, of course, we get the fireworks complaints and that, and some of those I feel confident in our firearms as well during those times of year.
Could we accomplish what you're suggesting? Is there a way to Miltonize the state version so that we don't have to necessarily change the rules, but we change where an action is required, where the case would be heard? Is there a way to take a path where we take it out of the state's hands and we do localize it, which I believe might be advantageous, but not necessarily put anything in? I've had a lot of expressed concern from the community, and it's the things that you would expect. It's civil liberties, and it's Second Amendment, and the kinds of things that may or may not be appropriate to this. But I think their concerns would be arrested if we said we're not actually changing state law. We're not adopting anything any more egregious, but we're actually localizing it by allowing the instance where a violation has occurred and a ticket has been issued, that it's heard by our own folks.
Right. We could adopt just a city ordinance to mirror the state law. You can correct me if I'm wrong. We must have at least some difference between the state laws. For instance, firing across the property of another.
Maybe that's the answer.
Nature.
Maybe, I like what Rick was suggesting, where that should be a concern anyway. I mean, you shouldn't be firing across somebody else's property. Either you have enough property or you don't.
Right. I think it's just some odd shaped properties where you could actually stand on your property and shoot
Yeah.
to your property and have a property in between, just a small parcel.
Yeah. And I could see a path where we could Miltonize it, get it where it's heard within our jurisdiction, but not have to make any changes that are causing the alarm from the community.
I mean, I guess one other point was, maybe 100 yards is a little too far, but maybe 50 yards or something like that. But I 100% agree with shooting across other people's
Yeah.
property. I thought that was already against the law, so. And real quick on the state law, when it has 50 yards from a public highway, does that include city street? I mean, does that include all
does.
city roads?
Yeah, all
Okay.
public streets.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody's shooting across your property, aren't you going to shoot back? I know I would.
Yeah,
I guess that's where I'm trying to understand. I understand people are concerned. If people don't like the sound of a gun, they could say, oh, I'm fearful of this.
Mhm.
But it still is a Second Amendment right. And I guess I'm not in favor of trying to make it more restrictive. I do understand, like we talked earlier, shooting across somebody's property, I think that would be a concern. That'd be a concern of mine. But if I don't want to add additional restrictions on distance, because I know there are going to be, and I've heard from people too, you will be precluding some people from being able to actually shoot. And what you're telling me is we haven't had known problems where people are other than someone complaining, we haven't had known instances of people breaking the current law. Is that correct? There's
Correct.
a perception, just like a little bit different, but we have perception of people who live in subdivisions and they're next to a horse farm and they don't like the smell of the horse manure. Sometimes that comes with where you're buying. If you've got bigger lots, I don't want to restrict people's ability to hunt on there as long as they're doing it in a safe way, or if they want to do target practice. I still see that as a potential right in our more rural area. It's not applicable, obviously, within subdivisions.
Any other questions?
Could-
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Chief, could you buy a sporting clays trap for a larger property and practice with that?
I don't know of anything that would preclude that off the top of my head.
Or that would be a nuisance? I mean, as much as I am a Second Amendment person, that would be problematic because we're really not rural anymore. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, just curious. Thank you.
So Steve, Chief, did you get maybe some direction and maybe modify it a little bit and give us some options when it comes before us? Or
Absolutely. I think it was, the direction was pretty clear.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Moving to a little easier topic of tobacco. So we're looking at possible local regulation of tobacco sales and related products. Currently, the city of Milton does not have a local ordinance that regulates the sale of tobacco and tobacco alternatives to persons under 21. Again, like the other law, this activity is regulated by state law, specifically OCGA 1612-171. It states basically it's illegal or unlawful for any person to knowingly sell, barter, directly, indirectly, any cigarettes, tobacco products, tobacco-related objects, alternative nicotine products, or vapor products to a minor, or purchase cigarettes, tobacco products, tobacco-related products, alternative nicotine products, or vapor products to any minor, unless the minor for whom the purchase is made is the child of the purchaser. Advise, counsel, or compel any minor to smoke, inhale, chew, or use cigarettes, tobacco products, tobacco-related products, alternative nicotine products, or vapor products. And this is the code section that also prohibits persons under 21 from purchasing tobacco and tobacco alternatives. So that's just a picture of the state law. No real surprises there. So we receive in the police department a lot of complaints regarding the sale of tobacco products to persons under the age of 21. And so a local ordinance would help us to address these violations like the other one at a local level and mitigate many of the complaints that the department receives. So our objective would be to establish a local ordinance that regulates the sale of tobacco products and tobacco paraphernalia within the city of Milton. We feel like we would be able to maintain local control over these cases. again, swiftly process cases for quicker violation resolution, because if these go downtown, it could be months or literally years before the case is heard, if it's heard. It's not weeded out. We could hold out-of-compliance businesses accountable in a more holistic manner, utilizing the resources within the city. And that's really it. We really want to keep this local to be able to better control this. We're getting a lot more of these complaints, and we just really want to be able to, if we have an issue, to be able to take care of it, get it through court quicker, and limit or at least mitigate this problem.
So Chief, right now, if you're buy tobacco underage, you go downtown? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hodgepodge
Okay.
of a problem. It crops up in all kinds of places.
All right. Well, the more local control, the better, I guess. So any other? Paul?
So Chief, can you paint a picture for me as to how that would go down? You've got a complaint about a minor trying to buy alcohol in a local Milton establishment. So do the police have to witness the purchase? How does that go down with either who makes the complaint? Are you getting complaints from another adult observing it? Or are you getting complaints from the shop owner who's got pressure from the youth and they don't want any what's the word? Any retaliation from the youth for being denied? What is a typical
We
scenario?
typically get concerns from parents
Yeah.
that their children are able to buy vape products and tobacco products.
Okay, so they haven't necessarily demonstrated the value to their own child. It's not a good thing to buy tobacco. So they'd like us to do that for them
Well,
to a certain extent.
some of the concern, and I will say too, some of the concerns come from adults that, let's say they'll pick up their child from school and they go to a local convenience store and they're standing in line and they see what they think are transactions for underage tobacco sales. So they'll call us and say, hey, this store, you might want to check them out, kind of thing. And we are trying to be more proactive in our checks of both tobacco and alcohol in our businesses. And this, again, would help toward that effort as well. If an officer, we do have minors that we can send in to purchase, and that's typically how we would make those cases.
Okay, so in that case, it's about the proprietor rather than the purchase.
Oh, yes. This is definitely, we want the business to be in compliance. This is
Okay.
not to target the folks that are purchasing. It's the business.
Yeah, I'd rather be the city that's known that don't try to buy something
Right.
in Milton
Exactly.
because our businesses are
Our businesses will
being
not allow that.
responsible
Yes.
than to worry about chasing a misbehaving child.
Right. Yeah. We understand, children we're going to make mistakes and errors in judgment and that. We're not looking to charge children in our teens for this. We want to be able to more effectively condition the stores not to do this.
Okay, that I totally
That's
buy
the
into.
focus, for sure.
Rick?
How would you do that? How would that work out? What's the difference between this? We have to change our law so it's different than the state law in this case, like we just did, we talked about with the guns?
A bit. It would have to be a bit more stringent. One thing one weakness that we found in the state law is it pretty much leaves it to the discretion of the person working behind the counter, whether the person is old enough or not.
Whether they card them or,
Right. So it doesn't require them to card them, only that they're reasonably believe that the person is of age.
you know what other cities do? I mean, I know Alpharetta had a policy, no matter how old you look, they card you for different things. Do they do that?
We could do
with
that. We did.
Tobacco also, or?
We ran across that with Kennesaw, and we found a very strong ordinance with Kennesaw that did require that. That's how it was very different from the state law, is that they did require an actual physical ID for every purchase. We could do that. I've also seen where if the person looks under 25, for instance, that type of restriction, where it's still reasonable.
So what would you suggest for, see, I'm not in favor of doing, hey, you come in and you look like you're 85, but you're going to get carded for
Right.
cigarettes. I think that's
Right.
a little ridiculous.
I
But
like that 25 or under 30. If the person appears to be under 30 years of age, you're required to have.
I guess then you get into how do you enforce that. I guess would be interested in what would you suggest is changed to actually make this more effective for you guys enforcing with businesses? What is it? you're
Well,
looking-
when we get those complaints, we can be proactive. We have some state partners that have minors that they've already trained to go in and make purchases. And if we
Oh.
make cases on them,
Okay.
then we can move those cases into our city court and then work with those business owners. And then, of course, we hold the business license as well. So
That would be something you'd come back to us and say, here's what the police department is suggesting could help you if council in fact decides to go that route.
correct.
Anything else? Got direction on that one? Okay, good.
We're good.
Thanks.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, will the city clerk please say on agenda item B?
Mayor, that item is presentation of proposed landscape improvements along Hopewell Road at the Thompson Bird Senior House. Our Public Works Director, Ms. Sarah Leaders.
Mayor, did you want to ask the gallery just about public comment on the last item? I don't know that we specifically.
We already did. We already did.
Didn't you say you had something?
You're gonna read
I
it?
do, but they're not here. I'll have to scan it. I can't read it.
Yeah, no, we're all good.
They're not in attendance.
They're 10 up on that one.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So this item is a presentation on some landscaping improvements. In the fiscal '22 budget initiative, there was a funding allocated for improving the slope of the Thomas Bird Senior House. The Hopewell frontage is where we're targeting this planting, and there's about 500 feet from the roundabout up to the driveway. And these pictures show the existing sign that's at the corner of the roundabout at Birmingham and Hopewell, and then looking north up Hopewell Road, and then some pictures of the slope. So our project goals were to stabilize the slope. It's currently not holding grass seed or plantings, allow us to beautify the city's property, to reflect rural Milton with our design by choosing some native plantings in this area. And we'd be tying into a similar look at the roundabout at Birmingham and Hopewell. Future ability is to look at some public art as well on this property. So what we did initially was had our project consultant, who is Pond and Company, they actually did the design for the Hopewell Birmingham roundabout, and they did the landscape plan for it. And so we gave them the general idea to kind of extend that look of the roundabout up Hopewell Road. A few items we wanted them to consider in this layout were if we could utilize a similar stone stacked wall that's at the corner of the roundabout, to look at improving the signage that exists at the driveway to the entrance to the Thomas Bird house. So here at the north or the top right corner of the screen is that sign location. And then to look at within these plantings where some art features could be worked in. And it wasn't to identify that all of these would be art, but just some places that where art could be incorporated. And those are some of the asterisks shown of where they could fit in with those landscape proposals. So this was the concept. From that, we moved into a detailed planting plan where they laid out the number of plants and the types of plants and the locations to really cover this entire slope. This was the lower cost alternative to doing any kind of terracing or rock walls, was to just create this cover. It's related to the entry sign and wall. The picture on the left, like I showed on the first slide, is that existing signage that is at the corner of the roundabout. It's got the stacked stone wall with some floorboard fence and then the sign identifying the location. The picture on the right is the existing sign that's near the driveway. So we asked them to propose a layout that could upgrade that sign to look like the sign at the roundabout. So with this budget initiative, there was $100,000 allocated. The design cost us $6,500. We're estimating that the entry sign and wall could be around $15,000, and the plantings, as proposed, are up to $70,000. That's based on an estimated price per square foot, and we're looking at pretty big area of 17,500 square feet. which brings our total cost to $91,500. So we identified a few future considerations for this property as well. There's a koi pond that has a leak, hasn't been functioning. So in talking with the operators of the senior center, they suggested looking at changing that into more of a hardscape area if future funding allowed, and maybe a garden area instead of the pond that is a maintenance responsibility. And then the second consideration is the public art. So general timeline, we received final plans back from Pond on March 3rd, and we're proposing to bid this project for construction this Thursday. We could have bids due back by April 7th with a contract presented at the end of April for approval. This would allow us to get the planting completed this spring. Wanted to take a step back though and look at some alternatives. So the first information I presented is what we're calling alternative 1. It's to bid as designed. That's the $85,000 project with $15,000 for the sign and $70,000 in planting. But then we have an alternate 2 that we identified as well if we wanted to scale back the plantings a little bit. So if we get a target amount for the contract that you all direct us to utilize, we could then create a base bid where we had a minimum amount of planting and then see what other elements we could add to fit within that budget. And alternative number 3 would be to relook at the design and consider a reduced budget. So I'm going to highlight some options with alternative 2. So took the planting plan as it's designed, and the top shows how it overlays with the aerial imagery of the frontage. And I'll get into this a little more detail in the next slide, but we would propose the red area kind of in the center and adjacent to the house to be our base bid area. And then we could look at adding some of these other areas again as funding allowed, and if we wanted to stay within a certain cap for the plantings, we have a proposed tiering of adding some of these additional planting areas. This shows that graphic again with the red area being the base bid, and our recommended treatment for the other areas that if we weren't going to plant them, we would just sod those slopes. And then this is a breakdown of the additional areas and what we've identified as could be the priorities for implementing additional areas, again, depending on pricing. So area number 1 would be if we elected to go with the stone wall and fencing and the sign upgrade, we would want to do the planting around it, which is represented by area number 1. And then area number 2 ties in again with the landscape at the roundabout. So it would just be a continuation of that. So with that option, we'd have our base, the landscaping in the middle, and then the 2 ends. Then our next recommendation is to add areas adjacent to that base with priorities 3 and 4, and then 5, 6, and 7 just being if we want to, again, cover that entire slope with plantings, those would be the last tier of plantings to add in. This is just a breakdown by all those colored areas, and I've numbered them in the order that we're recommending to be considered. And it just shows the number of each of these types of plants that are in each one of those areas. Like I said, alternate 3 is a redesign. If there's direction to go a different route, we would need to incur an additional design fee, and we would be looking at a fall planting period. We wouldn't be able to get that in the spring. The recommendations are to move forward with bid alternate 2, where we get a bid for the base and we get the options to add. Allows us to keep planting the schedule for the spring. And what we would just need to do with that is just get concurrence on our prioritized planting areas that I showed you with those colors and numbers, and to get a maximum contract amount that you all might want to target for the planting component of this project. And I'll be happy to go back to any of those slides. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of alternates. But
Any public comment, Tammy?
We do not, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Jan, then Carol?
Can you go back to the one where you showed all the different plants, please? Yeah, that's the one. It's my understanding that some of those are extremely hardy and will spread by themselves. Is it possible to choose more of those? I think cornflower is one of them that has a tendency to spread by itself, so that the maintenance is not as challenging. And that was my concern, is that there's some of these plants that we can plant, they'll spread, they'll stay nice and thick. Others have a tendency not to be as strong on that type of slope.
Sure. And we did look at different heights of plants too. So the way the layout is those more of the grasses and there are some smaller shrubs. So those would be kind of in the back. And then a lot of the coneflowers and the black-eyed Susans and the phlox is really a ground cover as well, that you'll see those are more towards the front of the planting areas. So in the yellow and pink designated areas and the pink and green, which I can go back and show you. So yellow and pink and green. So those are kind of more of that front planting, or those spreading flowers. But we do have an option too. We're looking to get pricing per plant basis too, so we can add and subtract within these areas depending on the budget amount that's set too. So definitely something we can consider.
Carol?
Does anyone here remember what it used to look like 15 years ago? Buddy? And it's changed now with configuration of the roundabout, but the hill was covered with forsythia, which is those great big bushes with the long boughs. And in the spring, there would be 30 or 40 of them, and they were in yellow, and they were gorgeous. And the rest of the time, they were green, and then have weeds in them, and then have these problems. And it was a pretty fantastic display. It was also incredibly inexpensive. I have an issue with this in the sense that it's so manicured and so expensive, and with that comes maintenance. And as an avid gardener, coneflower and black-eyed Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan, they don't always just take right away. I mean, yeah, they might expand and everything, but you have to remember they only bloom for a month. So, then you're looking at, someone either deadheads them, or it's just a lot of stuff. You have some things that, like the switchgrass and the muhly grass. I mean, those things I don't, look, it's a beautiful design, but it feels more like Post Properties than Milton to me. And I think I'm looking for attractive, low maintenance, and maybe not quite so busy. But when you start adding in perennials and things like that, it sounds great, but it's not a surefire bet. It's a lot of work, and you're going to have the irrigation system. Is that factored in an irrigation system?
We are not considering irrigation.
Okay, well, then you can forget the perennials. It's not going to work. So anyway, that's just my opinion. If I would be in favor of a different design that is maybe incorporates more bushes and things that, whether deciduous or not, evergreen, just that maybe takes up space and isn't as a maintenance and is expensive.
I'll flip to this slide again too, that showed kind of the areas where those perennials were, and compared to some of the others that had more of the grasses and shrubs. So there were some of those in what we were looking at for the base, both the coneflower and the black-eyed Susan. And then,
And that's not a lot of those. I'm not picking on the perennials. It's just, that's a fair amount of maintenance when you have all of that coming together. It's just the cost is, to me, just on this particular thing, fairly extravagant when you consider maintenance.
okay.
Paul?
But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Carol has introduced for consideration. I assumed when I was first looking at this, that it has to have been sprinkled. And the fact that it's not really takes me to a very different place on color when color is so short. I don't know how many of those will carry color. I guess maybe the shrubs may carry some color year round other than just green. There's a purple looking one and some of those. That kind of stuff's great. But the flower part, Carol's point, it is more manicured. That's not necessarily Milton-esque. I'd love to see maybe was it forsythia you just said? It was such a great array there. Maybe we visit something like that can recreate a place and time that was pretty grand from what you just described. That has a more natural and more Milton-esque way to look at it. I'll also introduce this, which I do from time to time when we look at where there's flower maintenance required, that we engage the community for plantings, potentially save some money there. We put a line item for the plantings themselves, but we engage our garden clubs or master gardeners or whomever might be interested in helping play a role in that, where the labor part is free. They get a sense of ownership and a sense of place that they've invested time and blood, sweat, tears into. And we take out some of the cost for professional installation.
Sarah, so if we don't go with the base plan, we have to redesign it, and we're talking fall, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Just want to make sure.
It's going to be pretty hot anyway. And a lot of those plants don't need water, but
And
we
then
could have a drought.
a question on the sod, because of the slope, let's say we decide to sod it, will it take it? And will the sod be good, or are we thinking about, we might have to plant it and then tear it up later, I guess was my.
The more of the mowing component of
Okay.
the sod on that slope, usually it can be mowed on a riding mower at like a 4-to-1. I think we're right at that, if not a little steeper, existing.
I would never see that as a candidate to be grass. Then you're going to get weeds in the grass, and that's heavy maintenance too. I just.
Andrea?
That doesn't make any sense.
Sarah, was there built into the budget, like ongoing mulch, pine straw, annually, biannually? Just, I'm sure that's part of the maintenance, but what would be the cost of that large piece of frontage there to mulch or pine straw that?
So in the bid, the contractor would have to maintain the plants for an establishment period, make sure everything lived for a 2-year period, and then it would fall under our maintenance contractor to replace anything that didn't thrive. When we rebid our landscape maintenance services for facilities, we noted in that bid that there was going to be a substantial planting coming on this property to go ahead and account for landscape and pine straw maintenance around the plantings. So while our current price for maintaining this facility, it did go up significantly from our prior rate, which we believe was accounted to this future landscape maintenance. So we would be locked into that price, assuming that this is not above and beyond what the contractor had scoped. There would need to be some discussions on the scope that they anticipated would be planted versus what we actually do. So we do have a price that incorporates maintenance that's already budgeted for the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Sarah, you would want wall and signage to go in hand with the plantings, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, we need to know from council tonight if we want to go with the base plan or not, I guess. And Jan?
Have you thought of using like the azaleas, the Georgia azaleas and stuff like that, more of a plants instead of flowers?
We could. Again, with this one, we took some of the base materials at the roundabout and started incorporating those a little further up instead of changing direction too much with different types. So I went back to those areas. Let's see.
I would think if we went to more larger base plants, it would be easier to maintain and might look just as nice, just different times of the year.
Sure.
I'll tell you something, this is not my area of expertise. So, Rick?
I guess I'm leaning more where the discussion was, get more hardy plants. You could still get some color, like Jan and Carol said, forsythia is usually pretty hardy and it's not going to be all over, but you have the blooms for like 3 weeks or so of the yellow in the spring look beautiful, but then you've got green up until the fall, especially if we're not going to have sprinkling there. Because that would be my concern, is if we put a lot of flowers on a hill where the water's not going to maintain, the water's probably going to run right by, we're probably going to see them die. One question, could you go back that picture you just had up? It may be a foolish question, but is that a sidewalk coming up to the road right there? What is that on the bottom right-hand side?
On the opposite side of the street.
Yeah,
That's the curb and gutter that was installed with the
okay.
roadway project.
Okay, so that's for water runoff. Are we ever looking at doing anything with any type of a sidewalk or walkway along that path?
We're not, it's graded out. The shoulder is graded to accommodate that if it was needed in the future. But we were proposing just to leave that slope in that current, it's like a 2% grade up to the power lines.
Regarding the sign, I'm not sure exactly what look you're looking at, but I would hope that we would do a more of an, in at least the area of the sign, an upgraded sign. I think the two signs that are there are really not very nice. And I think something more like what we've done in Crabapple would look really nice there and be a little bit better gateway than what we've got now.
Sarah, is the roundabout sprinkled?
It is not, no.
Is there a reason that we don't think about sprinkling roundabouts or areas like this when we have an opportunity to do that? Is there a policy that we don't, or is it?
It had
Cost.
been more of a informal policy that when we selected plantings, we chose native plants that wouldn't need a lot of supplemental watering. We do have, during the establishment period, the contractor will bring out watering trucks and ensure that during that establishment period that they're watered. But it was more of a informal kind of policy on when we started doing roundabouts, was trying to make them more native and
Yeah. Is there any
sustaining.
irrigation on the birdhouse property at all? Anywhere?
I don't believe so. David, our facilities manager, is here. So no. Okay.
Okay. Kind of shoots my next line of questions, so.
So,
That
I
can
mean,
get very expensive
it
too.
just sounds like from council, we're going to punt this to the fall is kind of the gut that I'm getting here.
Yeah, I think we have to.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to suggest is if there's a version of the base that we could do some substitutions within that area, or if we just want to revisit the whole thing. So either way,
Can you pull up the base plan again really
Yeah,
quick?
Sure.
happy to
Because I would
look
like
at
to
it.
get something kind of moving, because I know we've been promising some residents and it's been on the budget for a while, but
So the base was the mully grass and then this distilleum. So it's a shrub plant. And those are the numbers you can see there. And then it does have the some of that perennial black-eyed Susan and coneflower.
And
and-
those are, excuse me, just by the two areas, by the
So that was,
one and
the
two?
red.
Oh, and the red.
mhm.
Okay.
Is that where the biggest erosion is right now? Is that,
Let's look at it with the aerial. So the red areas, the red, and then up into this kind of the peach area. I think if we got those two areas, you can see that's the most worn away.
Would bushes in the other areas overwhelm that and you wouldn't be able to see it, or is it right by the road? I mean, it looks like it's right by the road, but I don't know, you know. So 1 and 2, or what you're talking about is that,
one being the entrance sign and
Yep, one is up
so
by
you're
the-
talking about red. I thought you wanted to do the signage
like
first.
one.
Okay.
And so Sarah, the base is 85K with the signage and the wall. Is that right? The red, the wall and signage?
That is, the 85K is everything.
Okay.
Could we take the perennials out of that base and put azaleas or a combination of azaleas and something else, just hardy plants?
We could, another plant we had identified, I didn't reference this in the presentation, but I put the picture in, is a, one that our city landscape architect mentioned as well. It's called Sunshine ligustrum, I believe. So it's this yellowy, a yellow, kind of yellow-green shrub. And so we were going to get some supplemental pricing to add some of that into the mix as well. It's not the bright yellow of the, of some of the other shrubs, but that was another one we'd identified. It may be best just to revisit this with this input and get our designer to rethink it a little bit.
I think landscape is like art, you know, it's the
Right.
eye of the beholder, I guess, you know, but I think we have some good comments back, and I think if we wait till fall, it's not the end of the world, I guess, you know. Y'all okay with that?
Thank you, Sarah.
Cool. Thank
Okay.
you.
Say it.
Yeah, or, I mean, I'd like what you were kind of hinting at, if you could at least change maybe the very entrance where we've got the sign. I don't know how much that would cost, just to at least get a start, because that sign's kind of stark that we have right now. There's no plantings there. Maybe you make the entrance that number 1 gray area. I don't know how much that would cost. Is that something we could do? The stacked stone and whatever, that's going to be the same no matter when we do it, correct?
Right.
Are you talking about in the fall, you mean? If we move this to the fall, you're talking about now? Because if we go now, I think we're on a pretty tight time crunch from what I saw. Is that right?
We are, yes. We want to get spring planting in. We would need to get this going pretty quick, but
You couldn't, that's not an option, as you're saying, to.
we
do
could
number one.
we could make the bid just the wall, the sign, and the plantings in this number 1, kind of that gray area, and just dress up that corner of it. We're going to get better pricing on planting the more we have. So that'd be the only reason to wait and do it all with fall planting.
That sign may fall over before fall. The sign's not in terribly good standing.
But plus,
Well,
like,
if the vendor is expecting to do business with us, why would the price not be negotiable? Because I'm in favor of that, if that works for you
I
all.
think she's saying as
Mabel.
far as the bidding process goes, you gotta bid it out, then you gotta rebid it, you know, it's not.
I don't think there's going to be a huge difference, though, in the price for
Yeah.
doing that section 1.
Yeah.
And the section 1 really looks, waiting till fall's a long time to wait.
Yeah, that's
the
fine.
yeah, the
I mean, with
stacked
me,
stone,
what is it? It's just stone and what bushes?
The bushes around that sign.
The gray area had some, let's see, black-eyed Susans, the phlox, and the distilleum.
So that's manageable. It's right there by the sign. I mean, that's
And how much,
normal.
but I
That'd
mean,
be
do we know how much that's gonna be?
So that is, let's see, the gray area was 1,500 square feet, and we estimated
$4.
$4 a square foot.
So will they still give us that $4 a square foot price if they're only gonna do 1,500 though?
That's just a conceptual estimate
Okay.
anyway, so.
No.
We're talking about $6,000.
But if everybody feels like that's a immediate need, I mean, that's a high impact, low cost effort.
I'd be in favor of doing that and dressing it up, even where you actually could see the sign before you drive past it, knowing that's the entrance in. Dress that up right now. If it's going to be this, if it's going to look the same now or later, if we could do it now, I'd prefer to see it ahead of time. That's my view anyway.
You all
Mine
good
as
with
well.
that?
I'm good with
Yeah.
that.
So we're gonna do number 1, move ahead, and then relook at everything else in the fall?
So
that
we're
what I'm
just going to
hearing?
do number 1, not what we were calling the base before, correct?
That's exactly what I'm hearing.
Okay,
And Sarah, we're going to need to bring the some mock-up of the sign back before the council before we bid it, or
Okay.
before we accept it.
okay. So the plans include just the stacked stone wall, and it has 2 panels of 4-board fence with the sign to be attached and designed at a later, after it's placed. So this was for, these plans showed, again, that stacked stone wall and the fence panels to hold the sign. And then what the sign looks like could be discussed.
Saxon wall will help with some of the soil erosion too.
Correct.
Build it up and then actually elevate the sign a little bit too, so it's more visible.
Yeah, it's
That
more of
at the street
the
level.
sign holder. Yeah,
Okay,
so
and then Steve, you had said we could bring the mock-up of the sign so we could look at designs.
Absolutely.
sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
Hey, Tammy, please call agenda item number C.
Mayor, that item is discussion of Milton Facilities dedication plaque policy. Our Public Works Director, Ms. Sarah Leaders, or actually maybe David Bergmeyer, our Facilities Manager.
I'm going to turn this one over to David to present.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. My name's David Bergmeyer. I'm the facilities manager, and I'm here to talk about dedication plaques. So the reason for tonight's discussion is with new facilities coming online here in the near future and down the line, we want to establish a standard and a policy moving forward regarding our dedication plaques and be able to, we want to identify what personnel we want included on those plaques. On this slide is some examples of existing dedication plaques at our facilities. You can see they're all similar in style, but each a little bit different. Some have more information than others. And we just want to have a consistent standard moving forward. Here are some examples of other municipalities and dedication plaques. As you can see, some have more information, some have less. Some include architects, engineers, contractors. Some are just council members. So it can really be a wide variety, whatever we want to do with them. We've broken it up into 3 different options. Option 1 is just kind of our basic facility name, current council, and the date of dedication. Option 2 would be that same information, but it would also recognize additional council members at project commencement or when it was budgeted. So for example, former Milton Country Club would include Mayor Lockwood and a couple other council members that aren't currently on council. Option 3 would be all that same information, but also identify key staff involved in the project. The example is the public safety complex. You have fire chief, police chief, judge, and city manager, architect, and it would help recognize some of those key staff members that were involved in the project. Here are the 3 options we've come up with. We're open to taking some feedback and establishing a policy and standard moving forward. That way we're consistent moving forward. And yeah, I'll listen to some feedback.
Thanks. Any public comment?
There are none, sir.
Okay. Questions? Rick?
Is option 1 what we've been doing pretty much so far? Is that kind of what we see at Broadwell Pavilion and Bell Memorial, that type of thing?
For the most part, public safety does include chief judge, fire chief, and chief of police. But the others are traditionally just the current council, as you can see on some of these.
I mean, I personally like this more simple, like that one on the bottom right, Fulton County.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's
So,
Fire Station 43.
Yeah. Any feedback?
Go back, please, 1 slide. Let me see the 3 options. Well, I personally like spreading the acknowledgement. And it's only, what, 6 inches?
Yeah.
Which one are you talking, 2 or 3?
I mean, there's a lot of staff that make these things happen. So for me,
I guess my question is, how do you determine which staff members?
well, the chiefs,
Well, that's a public safety complex. So you're going to have more of those in that situation.
yeah,
Talking about just the fire, you wouldn't have judge
right, no,
or whatever.
yeah.
And I like the idea of the city architect, acknowledging, in this case, Bob on
Yeah.
some of this stuff. Council and city architect would be good in my book.
But I mean, on each building, who's going to make that call? Who's on the plaque? I mean, that's going to be a Steve probably decision and.
Well, if it's seated council, mayor, seated council, and city architect kind of is our standard rule. If there's going to be an anomaly to that, explain the anomaly.
But why would you choose a city architect over the community development director? I know they happen to be the same person, but like, how do you determine? I mean,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm just bringing out.
Yeah.
Well, if the chiefs,
Steve, I know he's about to choke on us.
Some of the facilities have no involvement with the city architect. And he's not the architect, he's really the project manager. But we have facilities that have no bearing on that. So as the passive part of Milton Country Club is a good example.
Yeah.
Where it would be more of a public works, Parks and Rec type thing. So we want to try to see if we can get one universal policy. So this way we don't have to come before you with every plaque and you're about to get hit with a bunch of plaques. So that's kind of where we would go. If you decided to go with option 3, I would ask that you vest within me the authority to determine who needs to be on the plaque. Or option 2 is very clear cut, and it captures both the council members that were involved in the funding and planning, and then those at dedication time.
The only time you'd have that second line would be if someone is no longer on council, but they were there when we approved the funding. Otherwise, they would be listed as active city council.
That's it. And the former Milton Country Club is going to be an example of that. You're going to have council members and a mayor that rolled off,
Right.
and new council members that have come on since.
all right, so I'm going to change and go with colleague here to keep it.
Was that 1 or 2?
Huh?
Was that 1 or 2?
I'll follow your.
I mean, I don't really have a issue either way, but I think simple is easy. I think we all know exactly what it's going to be on every single one. But in council, do y'all want 4 more council members on there? Is really the discussion, correct? Is that what option 2 is, Steve?
That's the difference between 1 and 2, yeah.
Well,
I don't have
former
a-
council members would have been on plaques perhaps when they were on council and they didn't necessarily do it, right? So I'm not sure that we have to carry the path forward because we might do something and then in the future.
I'm keeping it
our
simple.
names are
Let's
not
just-
down.
Whoever mayor and council.
All
is
right,
at the
let's go
time,
crime.
that's just makes
I like simple. The only thing I'd say, and you did it with the public safety, if we're going to dedicate a firehouse, maybe then we have the chief on there because it's part of public safety. Like we
But-
did at Public Safety
But
Conference.
then what do you do for like parks? I mean, is Tom going to be on there for, I mean, you know what I mean?
I think, okay.
Yeah,
I
keep
can
it
be had
simple.
either way,
Keep
but
it simple.
public safety, we made an exception because it was
I go with you.
public safety.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of.
I'm in
keeping it
favor of
simple.
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 Just, I'll break the news to Bob.
Hey,
Hey, I will give up my
I wish we
space
could
for
do this.
Bob.
I wish we could do
say,
this
Paul,
for
you-
flowers. You know, flowers is not going to be our thing, but
Look, I don't
plaques,
need
we can
to
do it.
be on there. It's just put Bob on there. It's
You
fine.
can say, Paul, that you pulled for Bob. that you
Gave
got
him
voted
my
down.
best college try, Bob.
Correction was the
Are
word.
we-
Keep it
All
simple.
right, thank
we
you.
good?
Gotcha. Yep.
Thanks.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks.
guys.
We're good.
All right, Timmy, please call the next item.
Mayor, that next item is discussion of creation of a Milton Trails Advisory Committee. Public Works Director, Ms. Sarah Leaders.
It's your night.
Yeah.
2 more. So this item tonight is we're looking for feedback on how we set the framework for this proposed committee, if there is desire to move forward with creation of this Milton Trails Advisory Committee. So in June of 2019, a Milton Trails Advisory Committee was created with the purpose to help support the trail plan and the trail prioritization plan that was ongoing. And that committee actually ended in 2020 when that plan was adopted. So there was a group that was gathered together again to support development of that plan. Since then, the creation of this type of committee has been referenced in the strategic plan as well as the comprehensive plan. And the proposed committee structure is has been identified to somewhat follow the Milton Green Space Advisory Committee, where it's serving as an advisory role in determining projects related to trails and bicycle, pedestrian, equestrian improvements. So to create a committee, we would need to do an ordinance amendment. And Chapter 2, Article 5 of the code is the section that includes the boards, commissions, and committees. And we would be creating a new Division 8 that we'd call the Trails Advisory Committee, which would fall right below Division 7, which is that Green Space Advisory Committee. The proposed sections that would be part of this ordinance would establish the creation, the membership, governance, term, conduct of business. The Green Space Advisory Committee also included a section on volunteer members, the staff's portion of or involvement in the committee, and then the ability to create a logo. So this is a take at the mission and purpose for the committee, that they would participate in bicycle, pedestrian, and trail project planning and development in conjunction with city council and staff. They would facilitate achievement of trail-related objectives and goals of the city. The creation of the trail would establish the policies and procedures that would govern the committee. And lastly, it would assist city council and staff in an advisory role on an as-needed basis. The membership would be proposed as a 7-member committee, all Milton residents and at least 21 years old. There's 2 different options for formation of the committee. Option 1 is mayor and council appointees, which is like most of the boards, planning commission, the DRB. And option 2 is more like how the Green Space Advisory Committee was set up. It was an open nomination process. So I'll go through those options on the committee formation. With the mayor and council appointees, we're ensured that there would be geographic and council district equity in the membership, and it would allow you all to nominate your appointees of choice. The negatives to that might be that the members may lack experience. They may not have the prerequisite knowledge or have been part of the prior trail committee, and we're not guaranteed to have a well-rounded structure with this option. Option 2, again, like how the Green Space Advisory Committee was set up with the open nomination process, it would allow interested citizens to submit applications. Staff would review those and identify qualified citizens, and the committee can be fitted to cover all focus areas. The cons are that this may not include a member from each district. It would be the goal, but it's not guaranteed. And how the process worked for that Green Space Advisory Committee is that staff reviewed the applications, recommended qualified citizens, and then council meets and determines the proposed membership, and it's done all in a single vote. Met with the prior chair of the Trail Advisory Committee from when the plan was developed, and just bounced around some ideas for what kind of people would be looking for this sort of committee. And these are some of the things that we came up with, and it was understanding Milton's rural nature, having some awareness of environmental issues and environmental sensitivity, construction knowledge, knowing what those processes involve, experience with trail use, including multi-use representation of pedestrians, equestrians, and bicyclists. And then another element might be some communication skills related to grant writing, sponsorships, social media. And in general, just enthusiastic and talented people with an interest in trails. These were some of the other proposed general sections I mentioned that were part of that would be part of the proposed ordinance. And most of these will just be standard language like has been used on past committees. The couple areas of difference are volunteer members. There may be an opportunity to identify not official members, but volunteers that could be liaisons with the community to share the message about trail projects or be advocates. And then the staff involvement, we'd be recommending that this committee be structured with staff serving in an official capacity on this committee, that they would attend meetings and assist in fulfilling the work. And I'll be happy to go back to any slides or answer any questions and get direction on if there's an interest to move forward with creation of this ordinance in this committee.
Tammy, any public comment?
No, sir, there's none.
Okay. Questions? Paul?
Sarah, how often are you proposing that the committee meet?
Initially, probably every other month or so, and then once projects are going, and just depending on the need and their involvement in the planning and development.
Do we have a targeted list of things that are, I imagine we do, thinking about what's in our strategic plan with some of the parks and some of the trails associated with that. We've got not a backlog, but certainly some targeted priorities that could benefit from some attention.
Yes, definitely.
Any other questions for Sarah? I guess we need to give her a direction on, right? And Jan?
Can you go back to the one, the second option as far as the selection? Yeah, that one there. I think I'd like to see us do this, and I'd like to see us do option 2 with the caveat that when we select people, we make sure we have somebody from each area of the city. So, I mean, where it says one member from each district, not guaranteed, well, I would change that to say you had to have somebody. So in other words, you get all these resumes, you got to divide them up by area and then say, okay, who from this area gets it there and here? Because I think you'll lose some credibility when it ends up that it's a pocket of people in one area versus there are different needs in different parts, and you have to live in those areas a lot of time to really understand how best to solve them. And I think those people would bring the best to the committee.
How is that different than one?
Because one is you choose it. You choose like one person.
And they follow
You
your
would
term.
nominate.
And they follow your
Yeah.
term. This would let staff
Consistency.
pick who they think is best, but they have to do that by making sure they geographically have somebody in each area of the city.
Now, just to clarify, when I think Rick might have been the only one on council when they did the green space committee. And can you explain, because council actually picked that, right? Tell me how that process worked.
So that was, we had individuals submit applications, and then staff went through those to identify those that met the requirements. And then we presented that to council, and they decided who they were going to go with from a slate perspective. None of them run with the, none of them run with any of the individual council members' terms. They're offsets. So I think 4 and 5, if I remember correctly. There's actually 9 people on that. I do have a potential solution that might be able to thread the needle on this, because it sounds like you're looking for geographic equity across the city, but you're also looking for that expertise. The DRB is an example of a board where appointees have to have certain prerequisites. The only thing you might lose in that is the variety of the prerequisites. If you all chose, let's say, a grant writer, then we'd have 7 grant writers and no construction experience. But it might be a way in which you could, if we work together to achieve that, staff could also do an open call we're looking for these kinds of skill sets, and then get that out to y'all. And that might be another way to at least grow that pool for you to consider with some of those skill sets.
So I understand you're kind of almost like you're soliciting it, but still the council person makes the decision, correct?
It would. Then you all could look to see who's within your districts and decide whether or not they're a good fit. And maybe it turns out there's a grant writer in District 1, but there's also a grant writer in District 2, but there's also a construction expert in District 2. And maybe in District 2, you go with the construction expert.
Essentially, we said 1 per district. We're really talking 2, at least 2 per district. And then we've got a third that could be a floater from cross district. I'm more in favor of going that direction versus having to do us try to come up with appointees, because I think that we get challenged sometimes to try to find
Somebody
who's
that's really gonna
interested
make
out there and who's really qualified.
Does that preclude a council member from encouraging somebody to?
So that was kind of my question was, when you give us this list of 20 people or something, is this executive session discussion that we're talking here, or how did that work with the green space?
It was an executive session then, and Ken just said very lowly, it can be an executive session now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I,
Another thing with the Green Space Committee is it wasn't set at a certain number. So the language in that ordinance said it would be determined and
After you
then,
go through your list of candidates.
right.
Okay.
There's value on both
Yeah.
options.
Well,
So-
you
I think we're all capable of choosing somebody competent, qualified from our districts. So I think we should have appointees that we can communicate with and that would represent, maybe we could collaborate with. And I think that's what the committee should be comprised of people close into us, because we've lived this for a long time.
I can see some value to that, because then you've got kind of a communication ownership
Yeah,
between a member of the board or the committee and a council member, where if it's more at large, you lose that
right.
coach and counsel, or vice versa. And I have no shortage of people who are interested in being a part of this.
Well,
all
and
of
people are
whom-
telling us all the time what they want, what they don't want. So,
Yeah.
we can find somebody that will,
So
Be
if we're
sensitive to that.
appointing someone, we should still look at the criteria and qualifications before
Yeah.
we appoint them.
But you could end up, by doing it that way, you could end up with a lot of people with the same qualifications and
That's
not,
okay.
not a lot of diversity though. Not expertise in other areas.
well, we're not building the trails ourselves. We're just understanding what people want to do and what's the best way to do it and whether it's cost efficient. I don't.
You could potentially broaden the descriptions a bit, like we have with the DRB. You have construction, you have real estate. It's fairly wide as far as skill sets are concerned. So we could potentially broaden that definition a little bit to give a little bit more flexibility. Conversely, you could just pick it how you would the BZA or the Planning Commission.
The thing that, I understand what Carol's saying, the thing that I like about, or at least a piece of the nomination or people come forward, is it's more of a call to people that we may not even know that have an interest that are out there, because we can tap into our own little circles. Sometimes there may be somebody who really is qualified that we don't even know of. Like, I didn't know that your wife was, an expert gardener. And in my circle, I may not know people that are that involved. Maybe, I guess, I don't know if we have a way to actually go out there and ask, if we can ask people who are
We've done
interested,
it
say,
before, I think.
Yeah.
And we can thread the needle to where it could be council appointed.
but ask for
Also
interest.
ask for stuff, but of course
That's what I'd like to see who comes forward in addition to people we may already know. And then we've got a list of people to choose from versus just going within our immediate circle.
it's funny, it's funny Paul mentioned, I actually have an Excel spreadsheet of people that are interested in the trail committee.
Yeah.
So I just know I personally will not have a problem probably getting someone, but to Jan's point, we don't want to put 7 people who are all, in the construction business. We want to have a diversity of everything, but I think we'll do that. I mean, that's just,
So Steve, if we choose the path that Rick and Jan are supporting, and I see some value to that, what's the methodology for the publication to the community to express their interest? What's that path look like?
We could do that a bunch of different ways. We could do it through social media. We could do it through news releases, things along those lines.
you're
Do
gonna,
do it through
they're going to be inundated. We're going
do
to
it through all through
Yeah.
all of you as well.
I just, like I said, I can offer you all several based on people who have expressed interest already, many of whom have very
Part-
specific qualifications that meet some of the parameters we've talked about tonight.
Part of it may be based on our location too.
Sure. But to your point, I absolutely think that, like, Highway 9 needs representation. It's a very different interest in what the community's output is looking like. I want to make sure that they have solid representation. And it may not be somebody who's got trail expertise, but they've got a passion for what the amenity needs to look like
we need to
over on
build.
that side of town versus somebody over on Arnold Mill.
That's where I guess I'd like to, like, we've got maybe a little different. There's some people I could go and tap. I would just be interested to know, well, who else is out there that has a passion in this area that would be interested potentially without any guarantees, but tell them, here's what we're looking for. Here's the, the skills we're looking for. And if you've got an interest, that doesn't mean that we have to contact you or we're going to do it, but at least I think it would, at least for me, it would widen the pool a little bit versus the few names that I may look at, because there's a lot of people I don't know in that area. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to thread the needle too. And maybe there's someone that will apply that I'm like, you know what, they have a great pedigree. So maybe we can solicit it and then it still be council appointed, which I think serves everyone's purpose.
I would agree with that.
That's kind of that's kind of the direction I'm going. I'm okay with appointing. I'd like to just see what level of interest and we can get criteria of what it is we're looking for. Then people know, oh yeah, I've got that and I'm interested. And then you could actually take a look and say, okay, talk to those people. You guys may be inundated. Maybe we will too. We don't know, but we don't know what we're going to get until we actually ask.
Yeah, are we all good on that? What's the time frame on this?
I would recommend we start drafting the language for this. We'll do it via resolution, right?
Right, it'll have to be.
That won't take long. And then we would come back before you. I just want to make sure you're good with, if you still want any sort of knowledge, skills, and ability sets with the people. And then if you're good with that, we'll start soliciting.
I think that would be good. Are y'all okay with having like kind of the DRB, how we have that generic kind of, okay. Y'all okay
But then
with
we'll
that?
pick our own.
Yeah,
Good. I'm good.
thanks, Sarah.
Okay, thanks.
Are you coming back or? Yeah, you are.
Stand up there. Don't even sit down.
Man. All right, Tammy.
Mayor, our final item is presentation of proposed Birmingham Park and Birmingham at Freemanville equestrian improvements. The one and the only, Miss Sarah Leaders.
Okay, this is an exciting presentation about some improvements we're preparing to move forward with, and really just wanted to get your final input on these as have the bid prepared to go. So what again, like I said, we're seeking feedback on proposed plans for bidding at 2 locations. Both of these have elements that were identified in the strategic plan and the comp plan. We've coordinated the elements to be incorporated into these improvements with the Milton Equestrian Committee, met on multiple times, and you all heard from them on the February work session about some of these improvements as well. And we're proposing to combine these 2 locations for bid to get some better pricing and due to their close proximity. First, I'll start with the Birmingham at Freemanville green space. This is a layout of the property in yellow, and it was originally set up as 6 lots. There's fencing between all of the lots with the exception of 1 and 2. There's just one fencing between 1 and 2. The location of the proposed parking to get this property open is shown it's approximately where the blue rectangle is shown. There is currently fencing, like I said, between the lots, and there's access with gates in that fencing, so the entire property can be accessed. And one other thing to point out on the overall map is Lot 1 would likely be impacted with the roundabout construction. So if the improvements are made and the property's open, then that lot might be restricted for a short period of time while the roundabout's being constructed at Birmingham Freemanville. So this is the location of the drive we're proposing to use for access to this parking. We're not proposing to come in with any concrete apron or asphalt at this time. There's a nice solid base foundation of that drive location. It's built up, the drainage works underneath it, and there's already an existing gate. The area we're looking to create the parking in is actually this dirt area to the right, heading north on Freemanville. And let's see, I'll get into a little more detail on what we're proposing here. So we wanted to create a large enough gravel parking area that a horse trailer would be able to turn around and not have to back out. So I'll walk you through this layout, and these are the elements we'll be discussing. So there's the parking area, fencing and gates to secure the area, some drainage improvements, general cleanup, and we're estimating that these elements will cost approximately $50,000. So on Freemanville Road, the picture I showed is the existing drive about at the property line between lot 4 and 5. So again, we wouldn't be doing any improvements within the right-of-way. All the improvements would happen beyond the fence. So we would leave the existing gate where it is. We would then start the 20-foot wide drive aisle. About 60 feet back, we'd create a second gate system. So it would allow the property to remain gated while a vehicle is entering. So if the gate at Freemanville is open, a horse trailer pulls in, they stop at this gate. Before they open it, they close the gate behind them. Again, it just allows, if someone's already on the site using it, to keep it secure and closed. From the picture, the aerial picture, you could see there's a section of some gating around a drainage pipe that's compromised. So we would need to replace that pipe. This would allow the drainage to flow underneath the driveway, and it would allow the parking to be raised so that water sheds off of it. And currently there is a drainage path across the parking area, which might be part of the reason there's not grass growing. So we would direct the drainage across, and we'd have a point where it could cross under the driveway. We would be installing, again, the second gate system, tying it into the fencing on Freemanville, and tying it into the fencing between lot 4 and 5. We'd also be relocating the access point to get between lot 4 and 5 for someone that's using the property. There's some downed trees and a few other items that we'd be cleaning up as part of the project. And I think that concludes this one. Any questions before I move on?
Yeah, just you were explaining a two-gate system. That going to be an issue if you're closing the gate that's by Freemanville with someone trying to pull in with a trailer where potentially they're hung up or they've got to stop on Freemanville? Yeah, I would think that would be a danger issue when you've got animals in your trailer. You want to get off the road without having to fight and get out or change a gate. And Carol, Juliet, you could probably speak to that more than me because I haven't hauled horses. So
That exterior gate would be open, correct? The one closest to the road?
we would not be closing it.
It would stay open unless someone's entering, and the only time it would be closed is until they get through the second gate, and then they would go back and open it up. So we'd need some signage and messaging to make sure everyone understands this concept, but there is about 40 feet from the road to the first gate.
Okay. So
Which is-
you could get all the way off the road safely.
And it's wide enough too that someone could pull at a slight angle too to get off the road if it is closed.
And is this for riding around?
On the green space.
Right.
So just from through the gates and between the fences all the way around?
Correct.
How quickly do you think that could be done as far as making that space available? Just relatively simple, like what we did with, other than maybe the fences like we did at Lacapani or Lackey Road. We set that up and
It's
graded
going to be
it.
a little more to the grading and to the gravel, and
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we're doing
no.
some drainage on this as well. At the end, I do give an estimated timeline, but that's for both projects together. Again, we're proposing to bid the two because they have similar scopes and similar materials, the two location improvements.
I think you would need to have some signage that people are not to put their horses in one of those lots and do a makeshift gate. It's not for pasturing, it's for riding,
Right.
so that nobody takes advantage of it that way.
I think, Ken, you had some language that we've used around the state, liability language on the, and posting of the park signs. So we protect ourselves as well as the people that were using it would know kind of the rules.
State law. Posted. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's posted, but
Posted.
Anything else, Juliet?
Do you ever worry about people just dumping their horses on a fenced-in property?
The equestrian committee brought that concern up as well.
Okay.
So it's just something as we prepare to open it that we'd need to, again, ensure that we have all the signage and express all the intent of the property.
you know, that's a good point. We should have a trail camera. We should have like a couple trail cameras that we can always access. Pull
See
the
if
chip.
something
Just
happened.
if something happens or if somebody
Vandalization.
does something weird, but one that where we could always get the license plate.
Is that, how would, because we have cameras at Bell, I'm assuming, right? Or at other parks, but we don't have cameras anywhere else, do we, Steve?
We have some cameras around.
Okay. See, we don't even know there's cameras around.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's a good thing, okay.
Yeah, trail
All right.
camera would be great.
right.
Just so that in
Great
the
answer.
event we can go and just see,
Yeah, if there's stuff,
We
if
might
somebody
get something
steals
more.
a trailer.
you know.
All right.
We could probably accomplish what you're seeking.
Sarah, at one point there was some discussion about availability of water for the horses on this. I think there was a relationship prior to all these transactions that established this current arrangement from the property immediately adjacent to it. Does anything come of those?
We did look at where we could tie in water and there are some streams on the property on lots 5 and 6. But what we would propose to do in the future, depending on, again, the usage and the interest in it, this first stage was to provide the access and get it open, but the water line does run down the west side of Freemanville. So tying in a meter, and even while we're doing the water work with the roundabout might be an ideal time to add in a meter and a spigot for water access near the parking lot, and again, just tied in off of the Freemanville line.
Great.
It's a really small property to ride. I mean, 20 acres goes fast.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You can lead a horse to water, but Paul.
How long?
I mean,
You're in charge of
you're not
making
there
the
that
trans-
long. You go, "Meow."
Yeah.
So,
Great stuff, Sarah.
You have more, Sarah, or is that it? I thought you have more slides, or are we going?
I do.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep,
Okay.
going into Birmingham Park next.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, so the yellow is the outline of the park property. The red line shown in this is, if you'll remember, the Birmingham property is deed restricted with the exception of 33.191 acres, which is shown in the red outline. The blue circle identifies the area where we're looking to make these improvements on this property. So the Birmingham Park property was identified in the trail prioritization plan. So it had a list of tiered projects. And what we're looking to do with this bid is to formalize a trailhead and equestrian parking spaces. We did look at if we could, while we're doing this work, to make expansions on the existing general spaces. And again, with meeting with the equestrian committee and others, feel like that currently that parking is adequate, and there might be, once we get the equestrian parking established, reconsidering that as a future phase. The other projects identified on this list would also be future phases. One is an existing bridge, and then the old logging road, the old bullpen road, making improvements to address the erosion on that. So those are still future projects. So this is an overall layout of that project footprint. And I'll go through, again, the elements that we're looking to do with this proposal. I did want to point out, again, the red line is that that 33-acre line that is not deed restricted. The Public Works Maintenance Building and Storage Yard uses some of that property. And as we're looking to locate places for equestrians to park and use the Birmingham Park, felt like there was a need to separate the uses, to provide fencing and gating around the Public Works yard, and then to establish, like I said, this equestrian parking. So again, this is, we did demolish the old shed building that's, I don't know if you can see the mouse cursor on the screen, but that was a demolition we did last year. We do some material storage, and there's active construction work going on within this area daily. The Public Works building sits down here on the other side of the power easement, and this is, again, an active yard area with equipment and vehicles coming in and out. So where the road comes in off of Hickory Flat, it branches off and goes towards the Public Works facility. We'd be proposing a gate there, and then we'd be running this, and I'll show details of the fencing in a few slides, run the fencing along the property, along this existing gravel access drive, and then turning it and running down again that non-deed restricted parcel line. We have a point where there's an existing gate in the power easement, and so we would be attempting to reuse that gate, but we've proposed a new gate as well. The power company only requires that they still have access to get through those gates if we do gate within the power easement. Let's see, so the branch off for the Public Works building is here. The branch off to go to the equestrian parking is at this point. The general site parking is currently existing here. And there's an old driveway that used to go back to the house. There used to be a house that sat back in this area. So it actually laid out very well topography-wise to create this parking area. So would be regrading the gravel road and then expanding it to provide some pull-off spots for horse trailers and create a turnaround again, so there's no backup needed. There would be 10 spaces, up to 10 spaces within this area for 16-foot wide by 55-foot long trailer parking. There's an existing power service line. We'd be putting in a meter and some floodlights to light up the parking area. There's an existing well, and so we were going to put in a base item for getting that well operational with a faucet that can be used for water service, and kind of creating this area as a new trailhead for equestrian trails within the park. The estimated cost for creating this parking area, doing the water fencing, all those improvements is estimated at $130,000. This slide shows a little more detail on this parking area. There's a 20-foot taper provided between all the spaces. These are not going to be marked spaces, but it's just to illustrate how many trailers could park within this area. Has a drive aisle, and in some places parking on both sides, and there are some places where it is just on one side. We're proposing to use some hitching posts as not only places for hitching horses, but also as a identification of where not to park. So it's going to help with the traffic flow through there, as well as providing that amenity. Like I said, it's going to be the trailhead with the water source and the connection into the power easement trail. And to the north is a connection into the yellow trail. I think I have talked through everything on this one. For the fencing, we're proposing a 6-foot high, be a wire mesh fence attached to wooden posts, And we're looking to put a top rail on it just to provide some more stability and a decorative look to it. For the hitching post, the previous plan showed there's about 13 locations where there'd be 13 separate hitching posts. Again, part of that is for horses and others is for more of the parking control. Almost serves as a barrier rail within that parking area. And we're just looking at a smaller diameter post to use there. So our next steps are tonight to get any input on these bid documents, any final comments. We're looking to get bids back on April 12th. We hope to present that contract for approval either April 25th or May 2nd. And we're estimating between both projects 3 to 6 months for construction.
Can I get you to go back to the first presentation and to the layout of the property? The first presentation. Right there. I hesitate to do this because I'm feeling I'm going to get chopped at the knees, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton of interest in this or value in this, but it's a large piece of property that's relatively flat. Is that not true?
It's got a pretty big ravine in the middle of it.
But it's a fairly level property. Is there any possibility of purchasing this back from the green space bond and using it for parks and recs and taking the dollars that you would use here for the equestrians and put those dollars at Birmingham Park? We're in such desperate need of quality land for parks and rec, and this just looks like a good piece of property for that. And so I don't know if that's something that's a possibility. I don't mean this.
I have no dog in this. I was
You
just
know.
asking where we stood on purchases. I mean.
Well,
it's an
my idea
interesting
was,
thought.
my understanding is if we bought it with green space bonds, we have to purchase it back. So my thought was, we're looking to spend money to buy Parks and Rec property. This looks like decent Parks and Rec property.
But maybe Ken can answer that question as far as, we can always purchase green space back, but putting money into Birmingham Park for improvements, I don't know if that was part of the green space bond fund.
No. All I'm saying is we were going to spend X amount of dollars to fix this up, right? Why not take those dollars and add it to the dollars at Birmingham Park, since it's where most people go with their horses
Oh,
anyway?
I got you. So whatever the money was spent
Right.
on
Yeah,
this. put
the
it in
50
Birmingham Park.
grand or whatever it was, put it up there to use up there. Just a thought.
I'll speak for this is in my district. You would get a lot of pushback.
Okay.
This is a green space that's celebrated for what it is, open pasture. There's a lot of celebration for the fact that we chose to preserve pasture land. And I think you'd be a lone voice in the wind in my district for sure.
All right,
Always worth a discussion.
Yeah.
all right.
Thanks for bringing it up.
So much for that.
Sarah, can you go back to the map for Birmingham? I just want to make sure I'm grasping where this is. So is the entrance to this the same road that goes to the right of the fire station?
Correct.
That's completely different than I expected you to present. In the original trail plan for Birmingham, was this access intended, wasn't it originally proposed that it be a totally separate access and it was going to be to the left of the fire station?
So there was,
You know where that little leg touches the road?
Yeah, in tier 2 or 3, there was a parking with a separate entrance off of Hickory Flat. As we started looking at where the trailers currently park, as well as this proposed parking area that was part of tier 1, from a grading, clearing, access standpoint, and again, talking with the equestrian committee, it laid out, again, better fit with the land at that location where it's shown. But so the tier 1 showed it kind of in that, I think that's going to be in the power line easement. I don't know if I have a full, back here.
Okay.
So it was kind of in this area was where tier 1 called for it. And then, like I said, tier 2 or 3 did have a separate entrance off of Hickory Flat.
Okay, that's just really different than I had understood for a long time the way it was going to be. I mean, if the equestrian committee supports that, I'm not going to pretend to be smarter than they are for a minute. But I just remember a lot of discussion about the importance of separating the two communities for all the reasons that we've talked about a million times with, dogs and size of horses and whatever. But they do take a left turn and go down the other path. Is there going to be, are we thinking about marking the parking lot that says equestrian only?
Yes, there would
Okay.
be some signage.
Yeah, I could see the importance of that for sure. And I can subscribe to it if there's those kinds of separations, because I do believe it's really important to have the two communities, the two different types of users in a remarkably different place. Pardon?
I said not around big animals.
Yeah.
The equestrian committee, they've looked at this and stamped it and everything. Okay.
Right, we met multiple times, and I sent them the final drawings as we were getting those together, and said, are there any other suggestions or any further input? And Tony said looked good, and he looked forward to hearing the presentation.
Okay.
Great.
Rick?
Maybe I'm the only one who's lacking on this. Could you describe the deed restriction, what that means as far as this property? What are we restricted? What can or cannot do with the rest of the park?
So the reason I was showing the line on this was related to the fencing for the public works yard. So the public works types of activities, I believe, and I know Stacy was involved in these documents as well. But what I wanted to show with showing this on here was that the fencing to separate the public works yard from the park was along that deed restricted line. So anything within that 33 acres was worded as Fire Station 43, I believe was and so they just designated an area that would be for the fire station for any county facilities at the time, and to get to a certain acreage.
Okay, so when you say deed restricted, it really is the fire station and where we've got the maintenance building and that
Public
type of
works,
thing.
yes.
The rest, we don't have restrictions on what, from a park standpoint, what we can do with the rest of that whole area.
It's the opposite. The deed restriction is on the park itself. The 30-something acres is not deed restricted. And any of the improvements we're talking about today is in the non-deed restricted area. There are deed restrictions associated with Birmingham Park, prevents us from doing certain, we can't build out there, we can't sell it. There's a whole bunch of different deed restrictions. But the purpose for this presentation today was to let you know we're not impeding on the deed restricted area with this project.
You done with the slideshow?
That's the end of the slideshow.
Do you have any more?
Any other questions for Sarah? Are we all good on that?
Yep.
All right, that's
Thank
fantastic.
you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. So I got one quick announcement. Wednesday, we have the Fulton County poll workers, or Fulton County, or maybe Tammy can tell us, recruitment fair Wednesday.
The recruitment fair, the poll worker recruitment fair, which will be great. It's going to be hosted here in City Hall and City Council chambers, and the Fulton County representatives will be here. I was able to attend the one that was hosted in Alpharetta, and very knowledgeable, very friendly staff, and people who are interested and want to be poll workers actually can register on site. So it's an exciting opportunity.
Is that 4 to 7 p.m.? Is it
4 to
kind of
7
open?
on-
Come whenever you can come?
Absolutely, on Wednesday.
And they're seeking, the poll workers are volunteers or are they paid?
They'll discuss that with them. Some of them are volunteers, but most of them that they will discuss is the paid positions that are available.
Great. All right.
Yeah.
Our meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not going to join that.